Do you think anyone wants to bear the burden of parenting alone? Trust me, you don't want to be a single mother like this. Imagine yourself having just given birth to your first child, a precious son, after months of anticipation and preparation. You're still recovering from the physical and emotional exhaustion of childbirth. Suddenly, your man, the father of your son, who was supposed to be by your side, supporting and caring for you, abandons you in the hospital. No warning, just gone. How would you feel in that moment? Shock, denial, anger, sadness, and fear might overwhelm you. The emotional pain and sense of betrayal could be crippling. As you try to process this traumatic event, you're also faced with the daunting responsibility of caring for your newborn son. The stress and anxiety of being a single parent, at least temporarily, could be crushing. How would you cope with the emotional turmoil? Would you be able to care for yourself and your child? The mental and emotional well-being of both you and your son would be at risk. But here's the question: what would you do if you found yourself in these shoes? How would you survive? How would you thrive? And how would you keep going in the face of overwhelming adversity? Open your heart to a story where joy turns to ashes, where the silence of an empty room speaks volumes. I need you to listen closely because this story is one of raw emotion, of pain that's almost too much to bear. Amina woke up in the hospital room, the sterile white walls and the incessant beeping of monitors offering no comfort. The pain of childbirth was still fresh, but it was nothing compared to the sharp, sudden pain in her heart when she realized she was alone. Her husband, Javier, was nowhere in sight. His absence was a physical thing, a void that sucked the warmth from the room, leaving her in a chilling solitude. "Where's Javier?" Amina asked the nurse, her voice barely a whisper, tears already beginning to streak down her pale cheeks. "He left right after the baby was born," the nurse replied, her eyes filled with pity. "He said he needed some air." But Amina knew better. The air he needed was far away from her and their newborn son, Kofi. She remembered their last conversation, his voice cold, his eyes avoiding hers as he spoke of needing space. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone, hoping for a message, a call, anything. But there was nothing. The screen was blank, just like her future seemed without him. Her parents, who might have offered some comfort, had passed away years ago, leaving her truly alone with this new life she was meant to nurture. Imagine the moment when your world collapses, not with a bang, but with the quiet absence of the one who promised to stay. The weight of solitude settled on her like a heavy cloak, pressing down on her chest until she could barely breathe. She looked at Kofi, his tiny face peaceful in sleep, and felt a surge of protective love mixed with terror. How would she manage this alone? No one to share the sleepless nights, the first smiles, the milestones? She tried calling Javier again, the phone ringing until it went to voicemail. "Javier, please, call me. We need you," she pleaded into the phone, her voice breaking, her sobs echoing in the empty room. "How could you do this to us? To our son?" Her cries were desperate, a lament for a life she thought she had. Minutes turned into hours as she waited for a response that never came. Each tick of the clock seemed to mock her isolation, her fear growing with each unanswered call. Finally, she sent a text, her fingers shaking so violently she could barely type. "Where are you? Kofi needs his father. I need you. Please, don't leave us like this." Each word was a tear, each sentence a plea to avoid. No reply. Just the silence of the hospital room and the distant sounds of life going on outside, life that she felt disconnected from, as if she were watching from outside a window into a world she no longer belonged. Every penny counted, every bill a mountain, where the dream of a new life becomes a nightmare of numbers. The hospital bills were another stark reminder of her new reality. The discharge papers included a hefty sum for the delivery and care, numbers that blurred her vision through her tears. Amina had no idea how she'd pay for it. Insurance covered some, but the rest was an overwhelming debt. She looked at her meager savings, which had been intended as a nest egg for Kofi's future, now needed for his immediate survival, and she cried harder, feeling the weight of her responsibilities like a millstone around her neck. The financial advisor from the hospital was sympathetic but firm. "We need to discuss payment arrangements for the remaining balance, Mrs. Smith," he said, his tone bureaucratic. Amina's heart sank further, her tears falling freely now, as she nodded, her mind racing with how she could possibly make ends meet. Back to a home that feels more like a battlefield, where every cry from your child is a call to arms you're not sure you can answer. Amina's first day back to reality was marked by the incessant crying of Kofi, his hunger echoing her own desperation. She sat on the edge of her bed, the hospital discharge papers crumpled beside her, trying to figure out how to feed them both. Her savings were non-existent, and without Javier's income, every decision was now a gamble. She called the social services number she found in the hospital pamphlet. "I need help. I have a newborn, and I'm alone," she said, her voice shaky, her pleas interspersed with sobs. "Fill out the forms we'll send you," the operator replied, the tone bureaucratic, devoid of the warmth Amina craved. "We'll see what we can do, but there's a wait list." Amina hung up, the reality of her situation sinking in, her tears a river now. She had no safety net, no fallback plan. Her mind raced through her options: jobs, childcare, how to stretch what little she had, each thought a new wave of despair. She rummaged through her wallet, counting and recounting the cash she had, barely enough for a day's worth of formula and diapers. Her stomach growled, a reminder that she hadn't eaten properly since before Kofi was born, but she pushed the hunger away, focusing on her son's needs over her own. She looked at Kofi, his tiny hand wrapped around her finger, and felt a resolve hardening within her amidst the tears. "We'll make it work," she whispered, more to convince herself than to comfort him, her voice thick with emotion, her heart breaking. Locked away in the fortress of your own despair, where every sunrise feels like another day of siege. The first few days at home were a blur of survival, where every moment was about managing the bare necessities. The fridge was nearly empty, the pantry had only a few cans of formula that Carmen had brought. Amina rationed it meticulously, mixing each scoop with trepidation, knowing it wouldn't last long. She ate whatever she could find, a stale piece of bread from the back of the cupboard, a can of beans she'd saved for an emergency. Her meals were small, often skipped entirely, to ensure Kofi had enough, her hunger a dull, constant ache. "Stay with me here, because this part is where the heart truly breaks." Amina stayed at home for weeks, her world shrinking to the four walls of their small apartment. The days merged into one another, with sleep a fragmented luxury. She was healing, both physically from childbirth and emotionally from abandonment, but every day was a battle against hunger, against the gnawing fear of how they would survive. Her tears were her only companion in the silence, each one a silent scream. Each morning, she checked the formula supply, her heart sinking as the levels dropped. She diluted it slightly more each day to make it last, always calculating, always afraid she wouldn't have enough for the next feeding. She watched Kofi's face for signs of discomfort, praying he wouldn't cry from hunger, her own tears mingling with his. Her own hunger became a background noise, her body weak from the lack of nourishment. She drank lots of water, hoping it would stave off the hunger pangs, but it only made her more aware of her empty stomach, the tears coming more frequently now, not just from hunger but from the sheer weight of her situation. During these weeks, she didn't venture outside, afraid of the world, of judgment, or worse, of not finding any help. She relied on Carmen's occasional visits, who would bring whatever she could spare. But it was never enough. The food was always limited, incomplete, a patchwork of survival rather than sustenance. Amina's mind was constantly on the edge, trying to figure out when she could start looking for work, knowing she needed to recover, but also knowing time was not on her side. She used this time to nurse Kofi, to bond with him, to teach him the little she could about love in a world that felt so devoid of it, her tears a testament to her love, to her pain. Desperation can be a cruel motivator, pushing you to face a world you're not ready for, all for the love of a child. Finally, after weeks of isolation, she decided she could no longer wait. Her body was still healing, but her mind was set with a resolve born of desperation. She needed to find work to keep them alive, to give Kofi the life he deserved. She prepared herself mentally, knowing that stepping out meant facing the harsh realities of her new life head-on, her heart heavy, her eyes red from endless crying. From dreams of art to the reality of survival, where every sandwich sold is a small victory in a war against poverty. Given her qualifications and the need to be close to home for Kofi, Amina found herself running a roadside food truck. It was a small, battered truck she managed to rent cheaply, offering basic meals like sandwiches and hot dogs to passers-by and workers from nearby offices. Her qualifications in culinary arts were far beyond this, but the job allowed her to work while keeping an eye on Kofi, who was often in a makeshift crib in the back of the truck during quieter moments. The job was incredibly stressful, let me tell you. She worked from early morning until late at night, dealing with the heat of the grill, the rush of the lunch crowd, and the unpredictability of daily earnings. Her hands were constantly busy, chopping, grilling, serving, all while her mind was split between the business and her son's needs. The salary was meager, barely enough to cover the essentials after accounting for the truck's rent, food supplies, and utilities. Each day was a marathon of endurance, her feet aching, her back strained from bending over the counter. The stress was palpable. She had to count every penny, manage the inventory with precision, and all the while, ensure Kofi was safe and fed. The smiles she put on for customers were masks over her own exhaustion and worry, her tears hidden behind the steam of the grill. In the darkest times, sometimes all you have is a friend whose help, though small, is a beacon of light in the gloom. Amina's thoughts turned to her friends, the few she had left. Carmen was the closest, like a sister since her parents died. With a deep breath, she reached for her phone again, this time to call Carmen, her voice breaking even before she spoke. "Carmen, I need help. I have no idea how to do this alone. I'm scared, Carmen," Amina's voice broke, tears streaming down her face, her body shaking with sobs. "I wish I could do more, Amina, but I can only give you what I have," Carmen said, her voice heavy with regret. She brought over a box of baby clothes, some diapers, and a few cans of formula. "This is all I can manage right now." Amina thanked her, the gratitude laced with the bitter taste of inadequacy, her tears mixing with the thank you. She knew Carmen was struggling too. Why did he leave, Carmen? How could he just vanish like that? Her voice was a whisper of pain. Carmen hugged Amina tightly, both crying now. "I don't know, Amina. Sometimes people show us who they really are when life gets hard. But you're not alone. I'm here, even if it's not much." Under the cloak of night, where every smile could be a mask, what dangers lurk for someone whose vulnerability is palpable? The bar was a different world at night, where the dim lights hid the desperation in Amina's eyes. She served drinks, her smile a mask for the fear that clawed at her insides. Senor Ruiz, a regular with too much money and too little respect, eyed her every move. "You could make things easier for yourself, Amina," he said one night, his hand too close to hers as he handed back his credit card. "Just say the word." Amina's heart raced with fear and disgust. "Thanks, but I'm not interested," she said, her voice firm despite the tremble in her hands, her tears threatening to spill again. "When the night grows teeth, and predators circle. How far will one go to protect their soul and their dignity? But it was a constant battle. Men like Señor Ruiz saw her vulnerability as an opportunity. One evening, he cornered her in the back room, his whiskey breath hot against her face, her tears already falling from the humiliation and fear. "I can make your life so much easier, just give me what I want," he slurred, his body pressing her against the wall. Amina's mind screamed, her body tensed. "No. Never," she spat out, pushing him with all her might, her tears now of rage and defiance. She reported it, but the manager's response was dismissive. "You gotta handle these things yourself," he shrugged, leaving her to navigate this new, terrifying reality alone, her tears a testament to her solitude. Every meal a testament to sacrifice, every tear a silent prayer for a better tomorrow that seems out of reach. Amina's meals were whatever she could afford or what was left over from the diner. She often ate standing, watching Kofi sleep, her own hunger forgotten as she calculated how long the formula would last, her tears a silent companion in the quiet. "Here, take this," Carmen said one day, handing over a loaf of bread. "It's not much, but it'll help." Amina's thanks were heartfelt but hollow, her tears falling anew. "I'm so tired, Carmen. Every day is a fight, and I'm losing." Carmen shook her head, tears in her eyes. "You're not losing, Amina. You're surviving, and you're doing it for Kofi. That's not losing. Witness a child grow not in comfort but in the shadow of struggle, where every laugh is precious, every milestone a silent victory." Amina taught Kofi to walk in the small space they had, each step a triumph but also a reminder of how little she had to offer him, her tears of joy mixed with those of sorrow. One night, as Kofi cried from hunger, Amina sat with him, her own stomach growling, her tears falling freely. "I'll find a way, baby," she whispered, her promise to him and herself the only comfort she could give, her tears a vow of love in the face of overwhelming odds. Before the storm, there was love, before the silence, there was laughter. How does one cope when the past is all that's left to hold on to? Amina met Javier at a local art festival where she was showcasing her paintings. There was an electric moment when their eyes met, his camera in hand, capturing the essence of life, and her, with brushes and colors, creating it. They were drawn to each other like moths to a flame, sharing a passion for art that transcended words. Their first date was at a quaint cafe, where hours flew by as they talked about everything from art to their dreams. Javier's laugh was like music, his stories of adventures around the world painting vivid images in Amina's mind. They walked home together, hand in hand, under the starlit sky, their hearts beating in sync, promising each other this was just the beginning. Sunday mornings became their sacred time. They'd lie in bed, planning a future filled with galleries, exhibitions, and travels. Javier would cook breakfast, often leading to laughter over burnt eggs or spilled coffee. They'd spend days painting, photographing, filling their small apartment with art, each piece a story of their love. They moved in together, decorating their space with their creations, making every corner a testament to their shared life. Javier would surprise her with little gifts, a sketch of her absorbed in her work or a book on art history they both adored. Their love was in the little things, the shared glances, the quiet understanding. Summer evenings were magical, spent at the beach, watching sunsets, their hands intertwined. They'd dream aloud about teaching their future children to paint, to see the world through the lens of art and love. Javier would speak of the adventures they would have, the places they'd explore together. When Amina told Javier she was pregnant, his joy was palpable, his smile the brightest she'd seen. They celebrated with a homemade feast, dancing in their living room to old records, the room filled with laughter and love. They painted the nursery together, accidentally wearing more paint than they applied to the walls, their laughter echoing promises of a life filled with joy. But then, like a plot twist in a novel you never saw coming, Javier vanished. Their last conversation was cryptic, his words about needing space leaving Amina bewildered. No fight, no sign of discontentment, just an abrupt end to what seemed like an unbreakable bond. Amina would often find herself lost in these memories, the laughter, the love, the dreams they wove together. Now, they felt like shards of a shattered dream, reflecting back a life she thought she had but was now forced to navigate alone. Each memory was a double-edged sword, bringing both warmth and a piercing pain, as she struggled to reconcile the Javier she knew with the one who had disappeared without a trace. In this chapter, every day is a battle, every small victory a testament to the resilience of a mother's love. As Kofi grew, so did the challenges. The food truck job was barely keeping them afloat, and Amina's hands were raw from the endless work. Every meal was a strategic decision. Would this be enough for the day, or would they need to stretch it further? Kofi's first birthday came and went without celebration. Amina sat with him, her heart aching as she watched him play with a makeshift toy, a plastic bottle that once held formula. "Happy birthday, my love," she whispered, her voice choked with unshed tears, the pain of not being able to give him what he deserved overwhelming her. She promised herself that next year would be different, but deep down, she knew it was a promise she might not keep. The struggle to feed Kofi was relentless. Sometimes, she had to choose between buying formula or bread for herself. She often went without, her stomach silent from hunger, her focus solely on her son. "You'll eat tonight, baby," she'd say, her voice a mix of determination and despair, as she measured out just enough formula, hoping it would last. Sending Kofi to daycare was another ordeal. Amina would drop him off at a facility she could barely afford, her heart breaking each time she left him, knowing he was in the care of strangers because she had to work. "Be good, my little artist," she'd say, kissing his forehead, her tears hidden until she was out of sight. The daycare wasn't ideal, but it was the only way she could maintain her job. Every evening, she'd return to find Kofi sometimes with a new bruise or a sad look in his eyes, and Amina would hold him close, crying silently into his hair, apologizing for not being there, for not being enough. As Kofi grew older, school became another battleground. The fees, the uniforms, the books, all were mountains to climb with no gear. Amina would work double shifts, her body screaming for rest, but her mind set on providing for Kofi. "You're going to learn, you're going to be something," she'd tell him, her voice a fervent prayer as much as a promise, her hands shaking from exhaustion. Kofi, at 12, was a quiet, thoughtful boy, his eyes often reflecting a wisdom beyond his years. He knew money was tight, he saw his mother's sacrifices, the way she'd save every penny, how she'd skip meals. He never asked for a birthday party, knowing it was a luxury they couldn't afford. Instead, they'd sit together, Amina telling him stories of the world, of art and beauty, trying to fill his mind with wonders he couldn't experience. But the nights were the hardest, with Amina lying awake, listening to Kofi's soft breathing, her tears soaking her pillow. She'd think of Javier, of the life they planned, and the anger, the hurt, would come in waves. "Why did you leave us?" she'd whisper into the darkness, her voice a lament for a love lost, a dream shattered. And as the years went by, the question remained unanswered, a ghost in their lives. Amina's story, their story, was one of survival, of a love that was both a beacon and a burden, of a life where every day was a cliffhanger, every moment a test of endurance. As the sun rises on another day, their journey continues, a tapestry of love, loss, and the undying hope for a brighter future. Would they ever find peace? Would Kofi ever know a life without struggle? The answers, like the next chapter of their lives, were yet to be written, hanging in the balance of each dawn that broke over their small, struggling world. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next video. Don't forget to like this video, comment below with your thoughts, subscribe for more content and hit the notification bell. We appreciate your support.